Thank you for sharing that. Hi.
Hey, thank you.
It's good to see you. I think one of the things that I'm always like, we've talked about this on Zoom, but there's so, when I think about the work that you do with protesting the death penalty and how frequently you are seeing your protests end in the death of another person, sometimes that you know, sometimes that you don't. I wonder, I'm sorry to go straight for the deep one, but how spiritual resilience, how you sustain that kind of level of sorrow and lament with people. Um, how does that work for you?
Well, thanks. Yeah, I hope I get to ask some questions too. But I mean, I think that it actually is a very sensible place to begin because, I mean, you all are, beyond the death penalty, although I'm sure there's still some folks that would like to bring it back. But I mean, we literally are still in a place where our government is killing folks. And, next month, I mean, I just did an event with Melissa Lucio's family. We have a woman who was wrongfully convicted. Her kid died falling down the steps, was pushed by one of the older kids. We know all that now. She's wrongfully convicted and likely to be executed unless we can stop it next month. So, I mean, it does feel overwhelming. And the main thing I would say is that we have a movement together, and this movement really is a family. I mean, it's people who have lost their loved ones. It's people whose family members are being executed, that are imminently facing execution, sometimes for things they're innocent of. And so they're carrying that, together. We're walking through that together. The people with the deepest wounds sometimes have the deepest hope, like Sharon Risher. Her mom, I mentioned her, she is a force to be reckoned with. She's against the death penalty for Dylan Roof, right? That the person who killed her mother. And she has this like bottomless well of hope that God's love has to be bigger than Dylan Roof's hatred. And that really, that's what this is about, So I will say that it has changed the way I hope. I have at one point, I had hope that our Supreme Court would change things. There was actually, a glimmer, a moment where we thought that might happen. I had hope that a Christian governor who I was 1 degree of separation with and have a friend who's in Bible study with them, right? Like that might change things. And yet that governor executed people. And so, I mean, that old hymn, my hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. I mean, it might sound cliche, but it's really true. I have as little hope as I've ever had that change is going to happen from Congress or our politicians or our Supreme Court or even our president. I'm constantly disappointed. So, in some ways, my hope is in Jesus and also in the church. I mean, we've got this foundation that's built on solidarity with the most marginalized. And so, I'll stop there, but those are just a few thoughts.
It's a lot to think about there. I was wondering, I was saying before, I've got this kind of team of people around me that I feel like really know me and love me and hold me up. And, we hold each other up. And I'd be really interested to know, like, who's your kind of inner circle, if you don't mind sharing? Like, who are the people that really, really know you and hold you up within the context of your community?
Yeah, I think that's a really, wise insight is even in Jesus's community, you sort of see layers of intimacy and growth. He's got his sort of core disciples. He's got John resting his head on his chest, I mean, and then there's folks, that are kind of in different, I don't know, I want to say layers, of kind of leaning into that. And I think that's been helpful for me to think, there's plenty of folks that I feel like I really lean on heavily, I mean, obviously my wife and my partner and everything, Katie. And then there's a few folks here in our immediate community in Philly. Mike Diaz, who's one of my closest friends. He's our block captain. He's kind of like a community elder in the neighborhood. He's been here longer than me. And then there's close friends. Our next door neighbor, Kaz, is the director of the Simple Way. So we're all living in this little village, a lot like many of you are. But then in the movement too, I have folks, that don't live in my neighborhood, but like Sharon Risher, I can call her, and she calls me when there are days when it doesn't feel like grace is, we don't wake up feeling like, you don't always feel like Dylan Roof should be alive, and that's okay some days. And so, but there's just so many friends that I lean on. So it's hard to name all of them, but I kind of think in different ways. And with the death penalty, there's folks in Tennessee. That's where my deepest relationships with men on death row are. And there's people, they almost all live in Tennessee, but we're carrying that together. And every time somebody is executed in Tennessee, we're crying on each other's shoulders,
Yeah, I can't imagine, honestly. I can't imagine. It's like how you fend off cynicism in the midst of that. I love what you shared before. And yeah, I'm just
let me ask you one back, because I think it's easy to, it's really natural to think about how do you retain your resiliency when we're executing people and we're at every one of those. But a lot of the things that are tiring are less spectacular than that. They're just like relationships that you don't have any more to give. There are things that, like doing the dishes, or even when I got in here, like finding a parking place in our neighborhood, like some of that stuff is just like unbelievably tiring, and it grates at you. So how do you deal with those things that are everyday fatigues?
When you figure that one out, just let me know. I think that it's the relationships and how I was talking a little bit before about boundaries, and that's certainly not something I've got figured out. And like figuring out, especially if I've got 2 kids at home, and the boundaries in my home have had to flex and change with the kids for different reasons when they've been struggling with different things. And, and then sometimes when you have in your own space things that violate the kind of sanctity of your home, how you cope with that, how you help the family cope with that. And I've been wrestling myself with how I don't become cynical, because it's really important for me to pray to see people as God sees them, and to see people for what they bring, the beauty in them, what they bring, rather than, see them as red flags that they're going to impinge on my life in some way. But then when you're trying to care for a community like a church or a space, you're still having to make those judgment calls for the people around you. And so I think that's the thing I find currently the most difficult, is how I get the balance of loving people that I really desperately want to love, but then when I have to draw the lines, it still really, really wounds me. It gets that marginally bit easier every time I have to do something like that, but it's still hard.
Yeah.
Sorry guys, can I get a question from
you?
Go for it. Okay, this is to both of you from Sally Mann. My question is to you both. If you had one way to change the way Christian leaders are trained, what would it be?
I would have people spend time with people that are very different from them. I think theological training, especially in this country, you end up in kind of homogenous groups. Even within church denominations, you can end up in a conservative, seminary, or you can, when do we actually cross paths with people that are different from us? And I know for me, like, part of my journey, is probably a story for another night, is LGBTQ inclusion, and coming from a conservative evangelical perspective on that, within that kind of context, God started to change my heart around these things through relationships with people that I literally knew no one until I met Angie that shared that perspective.
Been in love ever since.
My friends did think that. But it's like, I knew there were people out there that had a different perspective, but I didn't know any of them because I was in such a small environment, and meeting folks like, say, Angie and Ash opened up my view. So I'd love to see more of that in theological education, is people having to learn how to talk to people that have different views in a proper way.
Yeah, I think that's great, and it's wonderful to hear from Sally, and great. I on all levels, I think that we need to think about our theological education sort of from the ground up rather than the top down. And so I think reading reading theology that's come from that space. I mean, there's things like the Gospel of Solentinami. There's Paulo Freire, and there's different folks that have built pedagogies and models of thinking about theology from the bottom. And even doing Bible study with people who don't have homes and people who do, like, so that or doing classes that some folks are incarcerated and others aren't. Like, those are some of the richest, most transformative models, I think. And then the last thing I think on that is that when it comes to like counseling and a lot of the pastoral work that people do, I think learning from the recovery community is a really important model. So I don't know how to do that to immerse, people who are aspiring to be pastors into recovery community in a way that honors their space. But I think there's a way to do it so that we can learn more of a circular model, the wounded healer model, the way that recovery is not just professionalized, but it's shared, and we're leading out of those scars of the things that we've survived as much as out of our expertise.
Yeah.
I do have a question from the room, from the Zoom, if anyone wants one. No? Okay. So this is Sam Kaminja. It's Neil Loxley. My question would be for both of you around Sabbath, days off, rest, etc. How does that work for you both?
You want to go first?
Yeah. Oh, did you say you go first?
You go first. Yeah.
Oh, well, if my wife were here, and she's not, so I can say whatever I want, but she keeps me honest. I'm not great at a Sabbath, but I try to block off a day that is a day for that I do whatever. I think a way to think about Sabbath is do what's energizing to your soul. And that might be running, it might be reading, it might be blacksmithing, right? Like, but whatever is work on other days, don't do it on your Sabbath day. Like, for me, reading is not exactly what I want to do on my Sabbath day, because I do a lot of reading on other days. But and then my understanding is that Mother Teresa, she was really passionate about a Sabbath day, but they also had a Sabbath week and a Sabbath month. And then there was a Sabbath year. I think every 7 years, the nuns would take, it's very grueling work. And so they would take a year to be, to take off. So I think there's something about having a rhythm of rest. But then there's also something about Joan Chittister's idea of Sabbath, which is we need holy leisure. And what we do in our society is we overwork and we overplay. And they're very related to each other, and they're both very unhealthy. And by overplay, I mean we party, or we overindulge, or we do things that try to compensate for how overworked we are. And the way that we do leisure is not very healthy. And so there's a way to work healthier, and there's also a way to rest healthier, so that it's not like a binge thing. So it's good.
Yeah, I think my situation is a bit different because I've got a young child, and I've got two kids at home, and so particularly I was saying earlier, I struggled with postpartum depression, and so especially those first few years, it wasn't rest to be home with my kids. So like either I was working full out, or I was with my kids full out, and and it got to be like I would hide from family stuff in work. So that was a really difficult time for me to kind of work out what rest is, because it felt like there was literally nothing I could do that was restful. It's a little bit easier now that they're both in school, so I work Sundays as pastor, but we were really conscious of taking Saturdays with the family as much as we can. My husband's great and gives me space of taking the kids out, but I also take the time off in the week while the kids are in school and take a nap on certain days when I know I need it. And I'm really, like I said, really blessed to have people around me that encourage me to slow down when they know that. So sometimes it's not all about the hours that you do, it's about the emotional energy that you put out. And sometimes if you're just wrecked, I still have some long COVID, I'm just encouraged to rest when I need it. So I totally agree. And sometimes my little secret treat is I get a hotel room by myself and go away for 24 hours. And lay in my pants on the bed. Sorry, Shane, probably too much information on Facebook Live. But I've only done it a few times, but just to be completely alone, because I really thrive on quiet and just time to think and just be by myself. So, I don't know if that...
Not in your pants.
I've got a question from Dave, from Bonnie Down. This is to Shane. Shane, you went to Baghdad during the war there. Should some of us be heading to Kiev?
Well, I think that's a question we all should be asking: is what does it mean to interrupt this war in a way that honors Jesus and our commitment to being peacemakers? And I don't think it's a cookie cutter thing either. And I should say, one of the things that I learned from being in Iraq, and again, I was with, I can't remember exactly how many, but dozens, maybe 50 or 60 people there. And so we were a presence there. We were volunteering in hospitals. We were doing all kinds of stuff. So I would definitely check out groups like Christian Peacemaker Teams and Voices for Creative Nonviolence. I'm sure there's other groups in the UK and different countries that are doing stuff. I've gotten a lot of emails from folks that are headed to Poland right now to try to care for refugees. So I think that's beautiful, right? Receiving immigrants when we're able to, or refugees, into our communities and homes. That's all important. But the other thing is that when we were in Iraq, our community was organizing here, and over 100 people surrounded our federal building, calling for an end to the shock and awe bombing and the war in Iraq. And I mean, it's like 100 people were arrested here in Philadelphia for that action. And some of them spent time in jail. So I think there's all kinds of ways that we can rise to the occasion right now, but we should probably all be asking, what can we do right now?
Mm-hmm. I'm also really I feel like there's also people that are in conflicts around the world, and stuff in Afghanistan hasn't stopped, and people that are in refugee camps that have been there for years already. So it's ongoing work, and part of me is I want to make sure I don't want to forget the people that have been suffering for a long time, as well as I want this to be people rising up in compassion in all sorts of different ways and areas. Anyway.
Yeah, and I was just thinking, as I was driving up to Philly, about I was a lot of our news is about how dependent the UK is on Russian oil, and it's usually our country that is doing so complicit with all that. But I think maybe there's a way that some of us that are able to could begin to fast from fuel, or do something that says we are going to try to be a part of the resistance in whatever way that we can, and continue the work, like Danielle said, that we feel called to as well. Because there's so much happening here that it's hard for me to imagine going to Poland. We're fighting Melissa Lucio's execution. We're doing there's all kinds of stuff. So I think each of us, but we should listen to the Spirit right now, right? Because there is a lot at stake, and see how we can be a part of the peacemaking.
It's not all about us individually, what we can do. I think that's the thing I always, kind of growing up in a very personal-centered kind of theology, when you start to view things as a communal approach, it changes. It doesn't all have to be about what I accomplish in my lifetime, does it? It's like I can listen to the Spirit and do the things that God has given me to do, and trust that God is going to raise up other people. With Red Letter Christians in the UK, I've kind of had some of these moments this year where we're thinking like, well, tax reform is something that we're passionate about, but we don't have the tools to be, I'm not an accountant, all these things. But there are people that are working in that area that have the expertise. And so how do we throw energy and promotion behind people that are doing a great job in like Church Action for Tax Justice, or launching a campaign for wealth tax? So let's throw our energy behind people that are working in these areas that we personally are not.
And on the Ukraine thing, New Beacons signed up to take families into our homes, so we are recruiting more families when our house is full and the yurts are full. So when the British government eventually does stop being stupid and get visas.
Hopefully there's a decision on Monday. Krish Kandaya was on the news today, and so it's called Solidarity.
We can send you the link. Sanctuary.
We'll post about it on our site too.
Got a question.
I think it's worth spending just a little. This is such an important thing. As we're that one other thought I had on this is that what Red Letter Christians is doing in the UK and over here sometimes is inviting the church to stand up and be a prophetic voice. And one of the ways I think that we can do that too is by reaching out to the Orthodox Church, and particularly to His Holiness Kirill. So we will be releasing a letter from about 100 leaders asking him to be a voice for peace and against the war. And so that might be, there might be some ways, because frankly, if Christians decided to stop killing Christians, I mean, maybe even beyond that, but if that was a starting point, like that would make a big difference.
I've got a question from David Darbish here, question for you both. What can we do intentionally to build self-awareness and authenticity in ourselves and others rather than ego?
David is one of my dear friends. He always has these questions that I have to go away and think about. Could you repeat that one more time?
Yeah. What can we do to intentionally build self-awareness and authenticity in ourselves and others rather than ego? But yeah, that's self-awareness.
Really. For me, being really open to feedback, inviting feedback, creating opportunities for people to be able to give input into my life, whether that is like even just this last week at our church, creating a space where anybody could say what they needed to say, but also regularly inviting people to give input, regularly apologizing for things I get wrong from the front, I think is really important. Creating a space where people don't have to be afraid to make a mistake because they know that we acknowledge mistakes and that we'll say we're sorry. I think to me that's a lot about how we cultivate something that's not about ego, but that's about openness.
Yeah, and having community more horizontal, more circular, more egalitarian, and being a part of Red Letter Christians for me is about we always say we're a web of subversive friends, and so it's not a top-down kind of structure. And I think that's really helpful, because if we have real, true community and fellowship and not just this kind of personality driven work, I think that's really healthy. But the other thing that I see is that sometimes when we get influence or a platform, there are people who their knee-jerk reaction is to sabotage that, and other people's knee-jerk reaction is to leverage that and build an empire. And there's an equilibrium there that's neither sabotage nor empire building, but it's just trying to influence it for the sake of Jesus and justice, the good. And so I think it kind of takes vision to do that, so that you're neither too impressed or underestimating like what we're working with. Yeah.
And I'm just aware too, if I'm saying I'm asking for feedback, it's very different for me asking in my church of 100 people, 50 people, than it is you putting out on the internet, give me feedback. So you have to have some ways of filtering what people say, And I think there's been times where I've invited feedback that's been really, detrimental to me. And it's trying to sit with the Holy Spirit, allow God to help us to filter. But for me, like, I was thinking of this one time a number of years ago where someone literally sat down with me with a deck of cards of all my faults and handed them to me one by one. And at the time I was like, okay, God, show me what the truth. And I felt like God said to me, like, it's really good that you listened, but you did, they're wrong. So like but that was a painful moment. I wouldn't do that every single time. And I think what I would do with that now is I would bring what was said to my trusted group of people, and they would probably go, oh, forget that. Or they would say, well, that has a point. So it's like being open enough with people to take feedback from unexpected places, but also being sensitive with ourselves. Sorry.
One last question to you both. There are people who are looking to take up responsibilities, hard work. What advice would you be giving them as they kind of step out into new areas of responsibility and leadership to be able to sustain it?
Okay.
Well, two closing thoughts. One of them is one of the things that Danielle said earlier was, you were talking about, some of the work you were doing, you weren't really passionate about it, or you're kind of carrying out tasks that weren't sort of the fire in your bones. And so I love that quote from Frederick Buechner, which I always paraphrase, but essentially he says, we've got to have our deepest passions connect with the world's deepest pain. And that's where the magic happens. Whether you're a plumber or a gardener or a school teacher or whatever gifts that we have, we're all wired and skilled differently. But when we're using those gifts in a way that liberate and that heal and that are a mission bigger than just ourselves, like that's very life-giving for other people, but also for us. And I think a part of why people burn out is sometimes they're doing things that they're not passionate about, or they're not skilled in, or they're doing things that they're skilled in, but they're not connecting to anything else. They're just paying the bills. And so I think that's the difference kind of between a career or a job and a vocation or a calling, right? Is that our skills and passions are connecting with the kingdom of God, and this alleviating the suffering of others. So I think that's enough. Yeah, that's enough.
And there are seasons of that too. So not everybody, it's a privilege to be able to do things that are like completely in the center of your vocation. And certainly I'd say I've been working in the center of my vocation for about 2 years, and I'm almost 48. So, but all the things that went before were things that built into me all sorts of learning that I wouldn't have gotten any other way, but to go through having a job that wasn't a great fit, or, there's seasons of these things as well that God can bring something in each of the seasons.
Excellent. Right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Danielle. Thank you, Shane. Give a round of applause. So maybe I'll just close in prayer, and thank you all for coming out tonight. And we've had a great meal with the real junk food folk. Those who are here, thank you for being Facebook Live have been putting questions in. They've been brilliant in the comments. This will be available on the Red Letter Christians UK.
It'll stay up there. I'm going to put it on YouTube too.
And YouTube as well. So you'll be able to see this. Pass it on to your friends as well.
I might edit out that bit in the middle where we couldn't.
Make us look a bit better. You're all right, mate. And especially grateful for Shane as well. Let me pray. Lord, thank you for these challenges tonight. Lord, may we find those sacred friends, those people who can help us go the journey together, that can give us good feedback and support and encouragement. Lord, help us not to be the ones by ourselves and alone in this. Help us join that web of subversive friendships that, where we can be positive influences for generosity and justice and love. Help us go now in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bless you guys.
Thanks, Shane.
I'm not sure how to turn this off.
Bye. See you guys. Love you.
Oh, there you are.
See you later.
Blessings, mate.